To know who the bosses are in Dark Souls is to know the story of Dark Souls. Finding out who these guys are, though, isn't as simple as just beating the game. You gotta really dig around to find the information, and even then it's just pieces of an incomplete puzzle. It's all about finding those pieces and filling in the gaps with whatever makes sense to you. If it makes sense to everyone else as well, then it's probably canon. This community puzzle solving is part of what makes Dark Souls' story not only interesting, but also fun. For those of you, however, who can't find the pieces or can't fill in the gaps, these videos are for you. First on our list happens to be the very first boss of the game. In your first encounter with Ilex Gundyr, you find him with a coiled sword through his chest and abyss tar all over him. But while he's the first boss in the game, don't expect to find any story about him anytime soon. All that information is going to come much later in the game when you reach the Untended Graves. It's essentially the same location as Firelink, except it takes place in the past. In this age you're visiting, no one linked the fire and the world reached an age of dark. The way I've interpreted it is that each age is meant to have a chosen undead like the first game. One particular undead or unkindled who is destined to overcome the odds and link the fire. Champion Gundyr was meant to be this person for his age, but for whatever reason before he could awaken, their firekeeper either found or was given eyes. Firekeepers aren't meant to have eyes if they're to fulfill their purpose. Or at the very least they're not supposed to be able to see, as you'll see most firekeepers are blind. Somehow Ludleth was still around previous to this Age of Dark that you visit. Upon finding the eyes there, he has a couple things to say about it.
Found her, did we? And the black eyes that shimmer within, I see. 'Tis as if it were but yesterday. We did all we could to spare her from them. Much has happened since. Mayhap I should apprise thee of what the thin light of these eyes might reveal to the eyeless firekeeper. Scenes of betrayal, things never intended for her ken, visions of this age's end. The eyes show a world destitute of fire, a barren plain of endless darkness, a place born of betrayal. So, I willed myself, Lord, to link the fire, to paint a new vision. What is thine intent?
So a lot of what is said in this conversation brings up a lot of the good points for the argument that ending the Age of Fire is considered the good ending, which honestly I'm not going to get into completely because there's so many theories about why each ending is considered the best ending, and it can go on and on. But for this particular case, what we learn is that having access to eyes allows the firekeepers to see into the Age of Dark and what everything is like without fire. With this knowledge, the firekeeper would choose to let the flames fade and usher in the Age of Dark, which is exactly what happened in Gundyr's age. When he finally did awake, he awoke to an Age of Dark in a flameless shrine. With his purpose failed and hope lost, he kinda just waits right here where you find him both times, serving as a proving ground of sorts for Unkindled. Now when you get to this part of the fight, it's important to remember that red eyes are a symbol of a being affected by the Abyss. Being that we've reached an Age of Dark when we reach this timeline, there's plenty of Abyss influence going on to turn Gundyr this way. Back when you fight him in the beginning of the game, which is the second time he's met you, the Abyss influence seems to have taken its toll in a very dramatic way, turning him into a full-on tar monster. Next on our list is the first Lord of Cinder, the Abyss Watchers. Or I guess in this case, Lords of Cinder. It's kinda complicated with these guys. See, each Lord of Cinder is from a different age, and in their age they were the people to link the fire. During the Abyss Watchers' time, they were an army of undead soldiers who swore to hunt down the Abyss wherever it showed up. They swore this on what they call the Wolf's Blood. Now I took this reference to Wolf's Blood to not be quite so literal. What I think they bound their souls and existences to is the soul of the original Wolf Knight, Artorias, whose goal was much the same as the Abyss Watchers do in their day. During Artorias' time, he was the only one capable of walking the Abyss and surviving, giving him the title the Abyss Walker. This oath bound their souls together as one, making them nearly unkillable, as the gift of the wolf's blood would bring them back to life upon death. However, since its oath not only bound their souls together, but also bound them to the soul of Artorias, an already powerful soul, It made them the only ones with a soul powerful enough to link the fire when the time came. They did so reluctantly, however, as their oath was to keep the Abyss at bay, not to link the fire. Fast forward to our age, and the Abyss Watchers have returned to life as Lords of Cinder. In their absence, their old home of Farron Keep had become influenced by the Abyss. Instead of fulfilling their duty as Lords of Cinder, they decided to return home and fulfill their duty as Abyss Watchers. But it didn't quite go as they'd all planned. You'll notice in the cutscene for the beginning of the fight that the Abyss Watchers seem to be fighting amongst themselves. And about halfway through the first phase of the fight, you'll notice a third Abyss Watcher come and join the fight. This one with red eyes, which as I said earlier is a sign of corruption from the Abyss. Their mandate to eradicate the Abyss, combined with their inability to truly die, gets them stuck in this endless cycle of killing each other. But they can't succeed because they all share the same soul. So as long as one lives, they will keep coming back and they will keep fighting each other. Until you come along, where in the final phase they channel their entire soul into one body. One that unfortunately has red, glowing eyes. In the end, you fulfill their duty of eradicating the Abyss within their own ranks, and returning them to their thrones that they may help you link the fire. For the next part, we have two bosses whose stories are tied very closely together. Pontiff Sullivan and Saint Aldrich. These two have an interesting dynamic where Aldrich is definitely the one the Pontiff serves. The Pontiff, however, seems to be the brains of the whole operation. Every deliberate maneuver made by the duo is planned by the Pontiff, where on the other hand, all Aldrich seems to want is to eat. Before Aldrich became this great devourer though, he was once an influential member of the Way of White, serving out of what is now known as the Cathedral of the Deep. What exactly his role in the church was, I'm not 100% sure, but it's irrelevant anyways. For those who don't know, the Way of White is like the church in Dark Souls, and they have a long history of corruption within their ranks. As far as corruption in the Way of White goes though, Aldrich takes the cake. At some point in his lifetime, he developed a habit of devouring men, consuming their very life essence to gain power. His clergymen brought victims to the cathedral for him to eat, and their bodies are strewn all over the place. These sacrifices mostly came from the undead settlement. The evangelists there were sent under the guise of enlightening the uneducated residents of the settlement and purifying diseases and curses, mostly by fire. Their true goal, however, was to find worthy sacrifices to be sent to the cathedral for Aldrich. He eventually became so powerful, however, that he had to be the one to link the fire. After his sacrifice, quote-unquote, he was entombed in the cathedral where he served. Archdeacon Royce and his deacons stayed behind to watch over his tomb. What I still don't understand though is why Aldrich decided to link the fire. My best guess is someone higher up in the Way of White pressured him into doing it, because even before he became the Lord of Cinder, he was never in favor of the linking of the fire, preferring instead to let the flames fade into darkness, which he prefers to call the Age of Deep Waters. Now there's some theories out there that this Age of Deep Waters is something totally different from the Age of Dark, which may very well be true, and I may be wrong, but I'm inclined to believe that it's just the Age of Dark and he's just wording it like that to sound inspirational to his followers. In any case though, we can all agree that he is not in favor of the Age of Fire. So naturally, when he comes back as a Lord of Cinder in this current time, he's not going to want to link the fire. Now before we continue on Aldrich's story, we need to learn a little bit more about the Pontiff. This is the guy responsible for the current situation of Vort and the rest of the Outrider Knights that you find throughout the game. There's not a lot of story to these guys, but the gist of it was that the Pontiff gave them special rings, which turned them into these horrible bloodthirsty monstrosities, kind of like Sauron did. When you're going into Irithyll, you can see the visions of these Outrider Knights going out. Vort and the Dancer were in love with each other, and these ghosts, as well as some item descriptions in the game, which I honestly can't remember which ones, are strong evidence of this. Vort really only became an Outrider Knight because of his relationship with the Dancer, who in this case was actually a person of interest. Now because of his ties to the Pontiff, Aldrich is likely the most recent Lord of Cinder. During his time, some of the old lords from Dark Souls 1 were still around, particularly the Dark Sun Gwyndolin and the Sunlight Princess Guinevere. During this time, their holy city of Anorlando had kind of been taken over by humans and turned into what is now Irithyll. Previous to the events of Dark Souls 1, Guinevere eloped with the flame god Flann away from Anorlando and the crumbling kingdom of her father. For reasons not directly mentioned in-game, Guinevere must have come back for some reason. And I think the key to finding out why she came back is in Yorshka's dialogue when you reach the highest rank in the Blades of Darkmoon, where she explains what happens to Dark Sun Gwyndolin.
The Dark Moon Knights were once led by my elder brother, the Dark Sun Gwendolyn. But he was stricken by illness, and leadership of the Knights fell to me. Then Sullivan wrongfully proclaimed himself pontiff, and took me prisoner. Oh, where could my dear brother be?
Now, first of all, there's a red flag where, you can't really imagine a god getting sick. And with the pontiff now claiming the right to rule, Gwendolyn tries sending word out to Guinevere wherever she is, asking for help. And she responds and brings her entire family with her to try to help restore order and control. Now, Guinevere is kind of a major symbol in Anor Londo. Hell, probably even in Gwyn's time, she was loved by the people even more than Gwyn himself. So with her influence, her family quickly became considered nobles amongst the society of the city, becoming a threat that Aldrich and the Pontiff could neither ignore or eliminate. And now we return to the dancer to continue where we left off earlier. One thing we know for certain about the dancer that's mentioned in the description for her soul is that she was once the distant daughter of a royal family, ordered to become a dancer for the Pontiff's pleasure, and then given a ring that transformed her similar to the Outrider Knights. And considering that her soul can be transposed into a miracle of Guinevere, it's likely that the family she came from was that of Guinevere's. Now, there's no telling how much of Guinevere's family was brought to Irithyll, but it's safe to assume that whoever else was part of the family probably met the same or a similar fate. Guinevere herself, however, could not be dealt with so harshly, not without backlash from the rest of Irithyll. So the Pontiff had to employ a little bit of subterfuge. She was taken to the Cathedral of the Deep, where she was given a place of honor alongside Archdeacon Klimt, who is mentioned to have served Rosaria. Now, I suspect that Archdeacon Klimt was not a long-serving member of the Cathedral. I think it's possible that Klimt was the firstborn son of Guinevere, and that he was given the title of Archdeacon so that he could be more easily influenced by Aldrich. Once he had been corrupted, Aldrich then sets his sights on Guinevere. Noticing the same symptoms happening to her as what happened to Gwendolyn, she tries to speak out but has her tongue removed by Klimt. Even with her mind and body twisted by Aldrich, she still holds faith that there's hope that her firstborn son might return and right the wrong he's done to her, while her followers bring her pale tongues in an attempt to comfort her. So I'd like to reiterate that this is mostly just my theories on the situation. There's other theories about Rosaria and Guinevere and all that, including one saying that Guinevere is Queen Lothric and Rosaria is the heavenly daughter Gertrude, which I highly recommend you go look that up because it's very interesting and makes a lot of good points. I just feel like some information points more strongly towards this theory. In particular, the questline involving Rosaria and Ringfinger Leonhard, wherein Leonhard kills Rosaria and takes her soul to the old seat of Guinevere in Anor Londo. Now, it's possible that Leonhard might be the firstborn son of Rosaria/Guinevere, as the only reason he does this in the first place is because he notices that her soul is still intact. But I think more likely he was a blade of the Dark Moon, sent by Gwendolyn with his last remaining sanity to try to find out what happened to Guinevere. I feel like this is reinforced by the fact that he's using a weapon of moonlight magic when you fight him, and by how his terminology and language changes when you start fighting him, as opposed to when you first met him. Things like referring to himself as a knight instead of a finger, or swearing by his vows to the goddess as opposed to being unchained and free like he mentioned in the beginning of the quest. I think he served Rosaria initially, trying to keep a low profile, not knowing that there was actually Guinevere. But like I said earlier, upon realizing that that was in fact Guinevere and that her soul was still intact, he decides to claim it and tries to take it back to the throne room where she once resided, in an attempt to return her to her former self. And so Guinevere learns too late that the illness affecting Gwendolyn is in fact Aldrich. Since his revival as a Lord of Cinder, his appetite has only grown. No longer satisfied with eating people, he sets his sight on the gods themselves. By the time you get there, the Dark Sun Gwendolyn is completely devoured, now a part of Aldrich. He uses the Life Hunt scythe in the middle of his fight, which is not only a miracle that can be transposed from his soul, but was also the weapon of crossbreed Priscilla in Dark Souls 1, which is a character that really brings up more questions than answers, so a lot of what we know about her is kinda just speculation, but I'll do my best to explain what I know about her. The only things we know for certain about her is that she's a crossbreed between a dragon and a god, and that she's somehow related to Gwyn. While it's funny and very much like Japan to imagine that Gwyn got frisky with the dragon at some point, It just doesn't sound like Dark Souls' style to me. I think more likely that Priscilla is the daughter of Gwyn and his wife, whose identity is unknown. But she was taken by Seath and experimented on for reasons you really can't tell. It's hard to see into the mind of a madman, or mad dragon in this case. When the rest of the gods found out what happened to her, out of fear they locked her away in the painted world of Ariamis. Fast forward to now, and the building that once housed the painting of Ariamis is no longer there. Instead, you'll find the Church of Yorshka, and at the top of the tower you'll find a familiar figure that is the church's namesake. Now I will concede there are some visual differences between Yorshka and Priscilla, but overall she's still got the same dragon-like features, including the ever so fluffy tail, now in HD. Now because of these small differences, most importantly her height compared to Priscilla, some people think that Yorshka and Priscilla are not the same person. But I disagree because of a couple very important things she says.
Long ago, our father Gwyn, lamenting the waning of the fire, became cinder of his own will. The Dark Moon Knights were once led by my elder brother, the Dark Sun Gwyndolin. It is thine, as a shade of Father Gwyn and Sister Guinevere. Persevere in thy knightly duty.
Key in these conversations is that she's mentioning that she is the son of Gwyn, the brother of Gwyndolin, and the sister of Guinevere. Since there were no other crossbreeds like Priscilla, let alone any that were descendants of Gwyn, that means Yorshka is definitely the same person as Priscilla. Name changes similar to this are common in the Dark Souls universe. In this case, the name Yorshka was given to her by Gwyndolin. Now the reason I think she's out here and not in the painted world anymore is because when the building was taken down, so was the painting. And when the painting was destroyed, everything that was trapped inside was released. That includes not only Yorshka, but the other peaceful citizens of the painted world. Now known as Corvians, they wander the road of sacrifices under the guidance of their storytellers who tell stories of the painted world that once was. Now I feel like there's a lot of significance in these storytellers. Can the Corvians really not remember the painted world themselves? I think the answer is most certainly yes, and the reason why is because I think when the painted world was destroyed, there was probably some memory fuckery going on as the people left. Those who remembered what they could became the storytellers. The rest of the Corvians listened to their stories and followed their guidance. And if I'm right, this aforementioned memory fuckery happened to Yorshka as well. Afraid and confused, not knowing who she was, she found Gwyndolin and was reminded of her past long ago, and given the new name Yorshka. Now the slaves of Irithyll worshipped Yorshka, or at the very least, items of Yorshka. Now it's possible the slave caste of Irithyll were actually Corvians themselves. Instead of following the storytellers, they chose to stay behind and worship Yorshka herself. This would cause it to make sense that they used the invisibility that Priscilla used in the painted world. On the other hand, in the event that they're not Corvians, they probably learned that invisibility from this guy, another Corvian who stayed behind to worship Yorshka directly. I feel like this one in particular remembered the painted world, but didn't choose to become a storyteller. At least not to other fellow Corvians. This one instead told his stories to the slaves, which is how they learned the invisibility. So, anyways, that was quite a tangent. At least fortunately that covers just about everything there is to know about Aldrich and the Pontiff. And there really is a lot more to talk about than I anticipated when I started making this. I'd hoped to get more bosses covered in this video, but I'm gonna have to save the rest for another part. I don't want this to drag on for too long. So I'm probably gonna make this a 3-part thing, but I've got another completely different video I want to make, which is part of why I'm cutting it off here as well. But rest assured, there will be 2 more parts and I will cover the rest of the bosses. Till then, I'll see you guys later.